It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Welcome to the playoffs, the real postseason, the 2024 National League Division Series. We are here. It has been less than 24 hours, more than 24 hours, depending on when you're listening, since one of the most improbable victories in New York Mets history. And we have one day to let it all sink in, one day to compare it to other great moments in Met history, one day to think about what could have been, and then it's on to the next. And the on to the next is, of course, a challenge with the team that I think is the most talented team in baseball, the Philadelphia Phillies, in a best-of-5 division series. It is cool to be in a best-of-5 series. It has been a very long time for this franchise, a very long time for us as Met fans. The last time we were ready for a best-of-5 division series was all the way back in 2015. And in a weird way, there were some similar circumstances. I think we went into that series against LA respecting the Dodgers and believing they were the better team. Doesn't mean you can't beat them, just they're the better team. I think going into that series, you looked at an ace. They actually had two aces back then, LA, and Clayton Kershaw and Zack Greinke. And you could argue the Phillies have two aces in Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola, even though Aaron Nola is going to go in game 3. This is a formidable challenge. Then you throw in the fact that it's Philadelphia. We don't like Philadelphia. It is surreal. Not just that victory on Thursday night, not just being here in the division series. I think what has really hit me about being surreal is that it's the Phillies. You know, the Mets and the Phillies have had this very weird dance over their histories where we've had some brief moments of being rivals. Obviously, 2007 and 2008 jump out at all of us. The whole Jimmy Rollins says we're the team to beat. The Mets choke away the division in 2007. Cole Hamels with Joe and I called the Mets choke artists, even though I may have put those words in his mouth. He still used them. But other than those 2 years of 2007 and 2008, where there were legitimate pennant races between the New York Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies, it really hasn't been there. It just hasn't. Now, have we gotten joy out of making that trip to Citizens Bank Park and before that Veterans Stadium and taking over that ballpark and beating the Philadelphia Phillies? Of course. I have a lot of great memories of going there. In fact, outside of the New York stadiums, there's no stadium I've been to more than Citizens Bank Park / Veterans Stadium. Even Camden Yards, and I lived there for a bunch of years. So it is almost like a second home. But never, ever have we come even close to playing what we're about to play over the next week. And that is a true best-of-5 playoff series. And I think because of the circumstances of the Mets being here in such a surprise year, the way they got here, certainly you think back to everything that was accomplished during the regular season, being 11 games under 500. You think back to what it took to make the postseason. You think back to even just a few days ago and what it took to get past Milwaukee. There's a sense of calm that I know I have going into this series that I'm not used to. Because in 2015, when they played the Dodgers, even if I thought the Dodgers were a better team, and I did, I felt this sense of, we got to win this thing. And maybe that'll change on Saturday afternoon. Maybe once the first pitch is thrown and I see those obnoxious Philly fans, I'm going to have that pressure of, oh my God, we cannot lose this series. But I don't have that right now. I don't. I have a calmness right now, a calmness of, okay, we're going to go take on the best team in Major League Baseball. We're going to take on a team that the Mets have had, I don't want to say a lot of success against, but the Mets have played them tough. Mets have certainly won some games against them. More recently, 3 out of 4 in a series that they desperately needed to have, in a series that didn't feature Francisco Lindor. But I think, and I do believe this will change. I do. I think that once that first pitch is thrown, that urgency that I've always had for every playoff series will arrive. And maybe it's just the high of that victory against Milwaukee the other day. But I have a sense of calmness, a sense of, let's see what we got against the Phillies. If we beat them, it'll be one of the great feelings you could ever have. It would really damage that fan base and damage that franchise and damage that team. And if we lose, well, I'll be disappointed. But I kind of think we are going to lose, right? See, this attitude I have, I want to bottle it. I want to keep it in some kind of box because I'm not going to have that on Saturday afternoon when Zack Wheeler toes the rubber. I'm not. I'm not going to have that when Francisco Lindor leads off the game with a double and I'm screaming and yelling that you have to get that run home. But at least for now, in this moment, in this off-day edition of Rico Brogna, I have a calmness. But I also had a very weird feeling. Throughout Friday, as we were celebrating the great Met win, I started to get nervous. I started to get very nervous about something that had nothing to do with winning the series. I got nervous about start times. I got nervous about what time of the game's going to be at Citi Field. I started checking my phone a lot. I started sending text messages to the Mets, people that would know, saying, what time's the game going to be? Because I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about my son. I'm thinking of, can I go to these games? I've been to every Mets postseason game in my entire life, but I'm doing afternoon drive at WFAN. What if the game's at 4 or 5 o'clock? And I found out late in the day that the games will be at 5 o'clock. And I had this sense of, wow, I'm not going to be there. And so I had a chat with my wife, nice conversation with my wife. I said, boy, this is crazy. I'm not going to be there, but I shouldn't be there. I'm going to be doing a radio show, and there's a lot going on in New York sports besides the Mets. I'll talk about the game for the hour that I'm on while the game's going on, but I can't be in the building. And she looked at me and said, you can't, but you can be in the building over the weekend, and you can be in Philadelphia. And I said, gee, golly, you're right. So Philadelphia, I'm coming. Met fans who want to invade Philadelphia, I'm coming. I went to Philadelphia for the Knicks and the Sixers, and I hate the Knicks. And it only is right to go back when my team's playing. So I can't go to both, but on Sunday afternoon, in the middle of a crazy football Sunday, I'll watch the Jets in the morning, and I will be in Philadelphia Sunday afternoon. So I very much look forward to that. I have been debating what should me, my son, and my wife wear, and my dad wear. That'll be the foursome that we're going. We don't want to antagonize those Philly fans. So I did think, in the spirit of the podcast and in the spirit of peace, right? We don't have enough peace right now in the world. We don't have enough bipartisanship in the world. So I have an olive branch for the city of Philadelphia. My dad's all-time favorite Met player is not Tom Seaver. It's not Keith Hernandez. For our older listeners, you will appreciate this. My dad's all-time favorite New York Met is Tug McGraw. So in the city of Philadelphia, who I think admires Tug McGraw, he was on the mound for the final out of the 1980 World Series. My dad will wear a Tug McGraw jersey. And in the spirit of the Rico Brogna, I'm going to wear a Rico Brogna jersey, as will my son. And I hope that the Philly fan takes that as an olive branch. Isn't that a good idea, Pete? That's a good olive branch idea. We go as Rico. My dad goes as the great Tug McGraw. How could the Philly fan be mad at us for that?
I mean, there's a couple other options you could have gone with. I do appreciate it. Like, you could have worn, I don't know, Billy Wagner Mets jersey, maybe a Zack Wheeler Mets jersey. I mean, there are other options you could have done.
Did you say Zack Wheeler?
Yeah, why? He was a great Met.
He's on the Phillies now.
Oh.
Did you forget? He's pitching game 1. He may pitch game 5. You couldn't pay me to wear a Zack Wheeler jersey. If I'm wearing a Zack Wheeler jersey, I'm basically a Phillies fan. I mean, come on, man.
But it's Mets. It's in Mets colors.
I think Rico Brogna and Tug McGraw are the perfect peacemaking jerseys to wear on a Sunday afternoon. So for all my fellow Ricoers out there, I don't know if you're able to make the trip. It is awfully expensive. The way I was able to rationalize spending that money was, well, I can't use my tickets for the games at Citi Field, so I'll just use the profits to go to Philadelphia. But either way, isn't this fun? Like, from that aspect, it's fun. You have the ability to go drive down I-95 and go to Philadelphia, and it is expensive. And jokes aside, I have always had good encounters with the Philly fan. The one thing I've learned about going to sporting events as a fan of the road team, and I've been to many playoff games in Philadelphia. Now, maybe it's not the Philadelphia sporting events you think of. I've been to numerous Sixers, Brooklyn Nets playoff games, and obviously a Knicks 76ers playoff game. And what I learned in those playoff games is if you just treat people with respect, you're not going to have a problem. And I'm not Maybe I may sound that way on the radio sometimes or on the podcast. I'm not a crazy, lunatic, obnoxious fan. I may be an obnoxious fan, but not in the way where I go to a ballpark and I'm screaming and yelling at people. So I think if you do make the trip over the weekend, Saturday or Sunday, or dare I say on a winner-take-all Game 5 Friday night, I think if you just keep to yourself and you're respectful, you will be fine. I also believe that if we get a winner-take-all Game 5 and they are going to have another watch party at Citi Field, I will definitely go to that. In fact, we will do a Rico watch party from the watch party if we get to a Game 5. But that's a ways down the road. So let's get to the baseball at hand. And we'll start with the big decision that was made on Friday, the decision for Kodai Senga to take the baseball in Game 1. Obviously, this is a stunner. This is a stunner. We heard the report, I think I mentioned it briefly on last night's Rico, about Senga being considered for a spot on the Met roster in this series against Philadelphia, which naturally leads to the question of, well, how are you going to use him? When you think about the Met rotation situation as of right now, everything's easy and kind of in line outside of Game 1. Game 2 is easy. It's Luis Severino. Game 3 is easy. It's Sean Manaea. Game 4 is easy. It's Jose Quintana. And Game 5 is hey, let's see how everyone pitches. We've got a few options for Game 5. But Game 1 was complicated. To me, you had two options if you didn't include Kodai Senga. Option number 1 was Tyler McGill. Seems easy. He had not pitched since Monday against Atlanta, so to have him come back on Saturday actually works out nice, neat, and organized. It's his regular rest. Before that, if you recall, he pitched the game against the Philadelphia Phillies, actually pitched very well against Zack Wheeler on a Sunday night. So one of your options was to just simply go to Tyler McGill. The other option was David Peterson. David Peterson clearly is the guy we would have the most confidence in. But what made it tricky with David Peterson was the fact that he not only pitched on Thursday, it wasn't a lot of pitches, but he warmed up. His routine was obviously altered by coming into that game. And that's the unknown of, okay, it doesn't seem like a lot. Is that too much to keep David Peterson from making the start on Saturday? Because he's clearly the best option. I don't think there's any dispute when you look at what he's accomplished, what he's done, how well he's pitched down the stretch, especially that game against Milwaukee last weekend. He's the guy. He's the guy you would trust the most to come out and make this start. If you look at some of David Peterson's splits against some of these Philly hitters, some decent numbers. But is he ready? Is that one-day rest going to be enough? And that's where Senga's a factor. And this is why I don't hate the move. I think there's a world where I would have hated the move. But the reason I don't hate the move is they don't have a clear option. Like, I didn't like the idea of Kodai Senga just re-entering the Met rotation when it was rumored a couple of weeks ago, because I was like, okay, so he's going to be the opener essentially for who? Why would you throw Quintana, who's pitched well, out of his rhythm? Why would you throw Peterson out of his rhythm? David Peterson's already out of his rhythm. And David Peterson's going to pitch the bulk of the game. That's at least how I would guess if I'm trying to kind of manage along with Carlos Mendoza. So why not take a guy in Senga who has a lot of experience pitching in big games in Japan and a guy who wanted the ball? What I found very interesting about the way the Mets talked about this decision, Jeremy Hefner, Carlos Mendoza, they talked about this decision as if this was completely up to Senga and that Kodai Senga needed to come to them and tell them, I'm ready. And I guess a lot of that is trusting Kodai Senga, trusting how he feels, trusting his body, trusting that, hey, we can't determine how your tricep feels. We can't determine how your calf feels. You tell us. We believe in you. So when you tell us you're ready to pitch, we trust you. We'll let you pitch. And so Senga comes back a couple of weeks ago, makes the rehab start, complains about the tricep, and then we don't hear anything. But he's throwing bullpens. And he's communicating with the Mets and apparently communicated enough to them to say, I'm good. Give me the baseball. Is this Kodai Senga just literally being healthy and really feeling better than he's felt all season long? Or is this Kodai Senga getting the itch? Is this Kodai Senga seeing what's going on with this team and saying, I want to be a part of this? I've pitched in playoff games in Japan. I now have a chance to pitch in a playoff game here in the United States of America. give me the damn ball. They trust Kodai Senga, and there's a part of me that trusts him too. Because Kodai hasn't been here for a very long time. He had a very good rookie season, an impressive rookie season. Yes, the Mets were very careful with him, and it sort of altered everyone else in the rotation. And this year doesn't even count. He wasn't really a part of the team. He made that one start in July against Atlanta. He was electric. He pitched great. The crowd was pumped up. It was this magical night at Citi Field. And then unfortunately, it looked like he got shot when he went down with the calf injury. But I don't mind the move because of the fact that this game one situation, didn't have an easy answer. David Peterson on one-day rest, even though he didn't throw a lot of pitches, wasn't the obvious answer. It's not a video game as much as we want it to be. So clearly, they're not comfortable with David Peterson making a quote-unquote regular start. Can he pitch out of the bullpen? Sure. Maybe he gets 12 outs instead of what we would want when you're making a start, which is 18 to 21 outs. And if that's the case, and Kodai Senga can look sharp, and the rare times he's pitched this year, the scoreless inning in the rehab game, the 5 1/3 innings in July, he has been sharp. He's been good. And I guess the hope is he can be good for an inning or two. And I think that's the expectation. In fact, I think the expectation is 1 inning. And I've got some numbers that provide maybe the evidence on why they did this. Kodai Senga in the top of the bottom of the first inning, not the top, in the bottom of the first inning, will guaranteedly face two players in particular, Kyle Schwarber and Trey Turner, because that's where the Phillies hit him. So Kodai starts this game, and he faces Kyle Schwarber. It's not a huge sample size. Kyle Schwarber, in his career against Kodai Senga, 0 for 6 with 4 strikeouts. Trey Turner will presumably bat second. Trey Turner, 0 for 5 with 1 strikeout. So maybe the thought is, you know what? We like these matchups against two of the Phillies' best hitters. Let's have David Peterson or Tyler McGill, whoever comes in next. I believe it'll be David Peterson. Let's avoid having to face those guys possibly multiple times. And that's really the thinking sometimes with an opener. If you get a scoreless inning out of Kodai Senga, and he's able to navigate Schwarber, Turner, and Harper, and then you hand the baseball over to David Peterson, you could get David Peterson to only have to face those players I just described once and still potentially pitch 5 innings. And I think that's a part of the thinking. So my assumption is we're looking at 1 inning out of Senga, and hopefully it's good. Hopefully those career numbers are backed up by a solid performance by Kodai. And then I think you see a lot of piecing together of David Peterson, Tyler McGill, but I'm not sure who else. Because this is a new series doesn't mean you just get to reset everything. Edwin Diaz has thrown a crap ton of pitches over the last week. And I am certainly not convinced that Edwin Diaz would be available for game one. Circumstances may dictate that. But if you look at his last 3 appearances, what jumps out at me is not the innings pitched, not the days he worked, but it's the amount of pitches he's thrown. Back on September 29th, Sunday, the final Sunday of the baseball season, Edwin Diaz threw 26 pitches. He followed that up the next day, game 161 against Atlanta. That's what we have to call that game, right? Just game 161, and everybody will know what it means, game 1 of the doubleheader. He threw 40 pitches. 40 pitches. And he had to. Like, no one's complaining about it. He had to. And then he obviously follows it up last night by throwing 39 pitches. So Edwin Diaz, in his last 2 appearances, it will only be separated by about 5 or 6 days by the time we get the first pitch of game 1, has thrown 79 pitches. I do not believe Edwin Diaz will be available in game 1 of this series against the Philadelphia Phillies. I don't know if Jose Butto is going to be available. And before any Met fan says, I'm done with Butto, he almost blew game 3. Jose Butto's pitched well. Jose Butto is still a weapon. Guys may struggle in appearances, in big appearances. That doesn't mean they get disqualified from being in the circle of trust. Look at Butto over the last month. He hasn't pitched a lot until recently. He hadn't given up a run. He hadn't given up a hit in how many performances? So despite Jose Butto coming very close to being the GOAT, and I don't mean the good GOAT, I mean the bad GOAT, from that game against Milwaukee, He has been very, very sharp. He's pitched very well. He had put together 4, 5 really good appearances in a row before he ran into trouble, and that trouble with the back-to-back home runs. Credit to Mendy. I said this the other night, that he got him out. I think sometimes you got to make that decision quick. I know we have a 3-batter minimum. You can't take a guy out after 1 batter necessarily, but when you give up back-to-back home runs, even if you get an out right after that, make the smart decision and get out. And that was a good one by Carlos Mendoza. But I don't think Budo's available in game 2. I think going into this game, and this is a part of maybe why the strategy is going to be Senga, Peterson, McGill, because I think those are the 3 guys that they may actually pitch the entire game. That's not crazy at all. You're talking about 2 starting pitchers and a starting pitcher who can't go far. You get an inning out of Senga, you get 5 out of David Peterson, you get 3 out of Tyler McGill. We'll see you later. Because this bullpen has not been reset quite yet. Right? Stanek's thrown the ball a lot lately, and a lot of the other guys you don't trust. Mets will have to make a decision, though. We know Max Kranick's not going to be on the roster, but there's going to be another pitcher that's taken off the roster. Is it Danny Young? Is it the Mets saying, you know what, Danny Young, do we need you? To me, it comes down to one of 2 guys, and it's not Adam Ottavino as much as you guys hate him. I think it's Huascar Brazoban or Danny Young. The Mets can keep Adam Ottavino off of the roster. This isn't one of those situations where you have to DFA a guy or anything like that. He's just not on the roster. No harm, no foul. Maybe I'm nuts. And maybe I'm way too loyal to Adam Ottavino. But if I'm making a decision between Ottavino, Young, and Brazoban, I kind of want the veteran on the roster. I kind of want that possibility of him being out there because we forget this. Adam Ottavino, as much as you may not trust him, as much as you may not want him in a high leverage situation, he was one of the unsung heroes from game 161. He pitched both games of that doubleheader, including the first game when he pitched a scoreless inning that kept the game close. Mets were losing. We were all giving up, but he kept the game close. So if it's up to me, I guess it's Danny Young at this point. I mean, I don't think they're ever going to use him. I don't think they're using those guys unless it's mop-up situations anyway. But I do believe in game 1, when you look at bullpen availability, it's going to be limited. And it's probably best that way because once you get to Sunday, if you don't use the guys I mentioned, here's the beautiful part about Sunday. There's a game, but then there's an off day. Then there's 2 games, then there's an off day. So you're able to use the off days of this postseason to kind of help reset bullpen management. It is easier during a regular playoff series to reset your bullpen because of the constant off days. The Yankees are going to have a great advantage, and I kind of wish the Mets had the Yankee format, but they go league by league on this, where one of the leagues, in this case it's the American League, goes game 1 division series off day, game 2 division series off day, game, off day, game. It gives you a lot of wiggle room and possibilities when it comes to your rotation, but it also really allows you to go full bore with your bullpen and not burn them out. The Mets are still trying to find a way to unburn their bullpen from everything we've seen over the last couple of days. Over the last week, it's been one of the craziest weeks in Met history. The challenge in game 1 is going to be Zack Wheeler. Some in the Philadelphia media are going to regurgitate a story from a half a decade ago because they think, A, it's interesting and it's good clickbait, and B, they think it's motivation. And that's the idea that the Mets, under former ownership, told Zack Wheeler, if you want to go to the playoffs in 2015, you have to buy tickets. We all know that's absurd. We all know that that's such a Wilpon thing to do. But the idea that Zack Wheeler gives a rat's ass about something that happened 9 years ago with a past owner and a past administration is absolutely ludicrous. So if Philly wants to repeat that story, they can repeat it. Trust me, we as New Yorkers are disgusted by the Wilpons. So you don't have to convince us anything. I don't think Zack Wheeler, and I heard his press conference on Friday, the Mets are just another team to him. Enough time has gone by where, like, I'm even getting over the fact that he's not a Met. Because to be mad about it is to be mad at someone who's not around anymore. It's like getting mad at the dead guy. What does it do? Mets history looks very different if Steve Cohen had bought the team 2 years earlier and had re-signed Zack Wheeler. Hell, if he bought the team 2 years earlier, Bryce Harper may be a Met and wear Mr. Met socks instead of Philly Fanatic socks or armbands or whatever the hell he does when he kisses the city of Philadelphia's butt. But it didn't work out that way. That's not the world we live in. And so Zack Wheeler, to me, is not a former Met. He's not a guy who's pissed off at the organization. He's just really good and really consistent and poses a huge challenge in game one. I was going through some of the career numbers to see, does anything jump out at me? So we'll go through a few of them against Zack Wheeler, one of which is that Brandon Nimmo has seen him a crap ton. 44 at-bats against Zack Wheeler, 13 for 44. That's a 295 batting average with 2 home runs and 5 RBIs, including the home run he hit 2 weeks ago. Feels like an eternity ago, but when the Mets played that Sunday night game at Citi Field, the last game they've played at Citi Field, they didn't bomb Zack Wheeler by any stretch, but they got to him just enough. And obviously that was an example. Pete Alonso has seen him 34 times. He's got good numbers against him, but has not hit a home run. 10 for 34 with no home runs and 3 RBIs. Lindor's got solid numbers against him, 8 for 29. That's a 276 average. Jose Iglesias in a limited amount of time is 5 for 12. So the Mets have some decent numbers against him. The one guy that jumps out at you where you say, oh, I don't know if I like that, is Jesse Winker. Our favorite douche. We all love Jesse Winker. Jesse Winker is 0 for 10 with 2 strikeouts. And I was also surprised to see that J.D. Martinez has never faced Zack Wheeler. I've seen that a lot with J.D. Martinez where there's a veteran arm and you assume J.D.'s got a long track record against them. And then you look at their career numbers and you're like, that guy's never even faced him. Doesn't even make any sense. But the Mets surprisingly have some decent career numbers against Zack Wheeler. I would be a little scared away by the 0 for 10 with Winker that I would go to J.D. Martinez at DH because I think things have gotten simple with the Met lineup. Maybe not the order. We know Mendy likes to shake that up, including the change we saw in Game 3 against Milwaukee when Pete Alonso moved to the cleanup spot and Iglesias chopped back to 5. But I think when it comes to everyday players, we've got it figured out now. It's obvious. Alonso first base, Iglesias second, Lindor short, Vientos third, Alvarez behind the plate, Nimmo left, Tyrone in center, Marte in right. The only question is, what do you do at DH? Is it a straight platoon between J.D. Martinez and Jesse Winker? Do you play the matchups? If you start J.D. against Zack Wheeler, understand that means Jesse Winker is not starting in either of these games in Philly because of the fact that Christopher Sanchez is making the starting game too. And I think that's a smart move by Rob Thompson and the Phillies. The Mets have seen a lot of Christopher Sanchez. He's got splits that show he's a much better pitcher at home. And Joe Torre used to feel this way about Game 3, that big swing game. And Aaron Nola pitching that swing game at Citi Field, a place he's very familiar with, makes a lot of sense. You also match up against the Mets ace, if you want to still call Sean Manaea the Mets ace. Ozian Woodridge is a very loyal caller to the Evan and Tiki program, and he was very upset with me that in discussing the Kodai Senga decision to start him, he thought it was a bad decision to start Senga because it's in Philadelphia, and it's a tough environment, and that was a mistake. I disagree with Ozzy, but it's worth bringing up. I am not afraid of the home road dynamic when it comes to the Mets in Philadelphia. That is not a knock on Citizens Bank Park. It is a very loud stadium. And as I mentioned at the top of the pod, I'll be there on Sunday. I look forward to it. I look forward to being in that building. I look forward to the energy of that stadium. And as much as we may have fun with the city of Philly, I do respect their fans because they're like us. I mean, they are Northeast, loud-mouthed, passionate fans. But I do not believe that Kodai Senga is the kind of pitcher that's going to be intimidated by that ballpark. I don't believe that starting him because he hasn't thrown a lot of innings this year is detrimental because you're doing it in Philadelphia. I don't think it matters. And if Kodai Senga gets bombed, I don't think it's going to be because of the crowd noise. I think it may just be because he hasn't pitched a lot. And this is the game to throw the risks out there. Because when you look at the rotation and you look at who's out there for Philly and you look at the Mets situation, based on the fact that David Peterson just pitched closing out the game and no one else would be on regular rest. I think the Mets realize game one's the game that, you're not punting. I hate that word. You don't expect to win that game. It's the game where you could take more risks. Game two, you feel stronger about. You feel, even though Christopher Sanchez had a very good season, that based on the experience of Luis Severino and the way he's thrown the ball, and he's been decent against the Phillies, a couple of 6-inning 3-run starts. Not that you have any kind of significant edge in game two, because I don't think you do, but I think you feel as if you have a better shot in game two than you do game one, because you don't have a starting pitcher on regular rest. Your options were Tylor Miguel, who's your fifth starter on regular rest, so I guess he is the starter that you could throw with only 4 days rest. David Peterson, who just pitched, or a guy who's only thrown 5 1/3 innings all season long. I'm not afraid of the home road dynamic. That does not scare me. But the Mets are lined up to throw Senga, the triple threat, really, of Senga, Peterson, McGill in game one, Severino game two, Manaea game three, Quintana game four if necessary, and then game five becomes a choice. Game five, I believe if we got there, we would know exactly who should start. You will have three options. You will have Tylor McGill. Very unlikely he's your guy. You will have David Peterson. Maybe. You will have Kodai Senga as an opener. Maybe. And you'll have Luis Severino. Because of the off days, whoever pitches game two could also come back on regular rest and pitch game five. The Phillies also have the option, if it ever got this far, and I don't think they would do it because they have Ranger Suarez, but they could always, if they're down 2-1, come back with Zack Wheeler on short rest in game four. The Dodgers actually did that in 2015 with Clayton Kershaw. Kershaw started game one. Mets were up 2-1. They went to Kershaw in game four. He pitched great. He won that game. It forced it back to LA for game five, and they had their game two starter, Zack Greinke, ready to go. Let's get to some of your emails, the ricob@gmail.com. Andrew Schwartz was writing, are we going to have an NLDS preview podcast? Is there a Rico tonight? And coincidentally, he wrote that right before we started the Rico. And then he wrote, wow, that timing was crazy. So we're thinking on the same wavelength, Andrew. Friday night, let's do a Rico. Robert Jones writes, believe in the baseball gods. Evan, heading into this season, we had an idea of the holes we needed to fill, and we filled them without breaking the bank. We didn't get off to a great start, but we ended the regular season amazing. The team has tremendous talent, and I give credit where it's due. I feel the confidence level is an all-time high, especially after the week we witnessed. It's about time the baseball gods are watching over us. P.S. I loved Buck, but we all know what happens the year after he leaves an organization. May the baseball gods continue to guide us for the remainder of this postseason. That whole Buck thing is weird, but that would be something if the Mets go on this run, continue this run, and Buck Showalter continues the trend of leaving franchises, and then things happen. You know Dan? Remember Negative Dan? Well, Dan kind of lost his negativity recently because the Mets have been playing so well. And then he wrote me to say, the bad thoughts are creeping back. And I'm like, wow, okay. Negative Dan is returning? Even after one of the great victories in Met history? I'm open-minded, Negative Dan. Why are you so negative? Here's what he had to say. I was really trying to fully buy in. After Monday, I was basically there. But my brain won't let me not think how horrific this lineup looks for the first 99% of all the games this past week. And now, if it wasn't for these insane pitching performances, who knows if they're even in the postseason, let alone the NLDS, going up against the best team in the National League. I can't just sit here and pretend like if this team pulls the same crap going up against this Phillies lineup. I don't know if the pitching is going to be able to keep them at bay long enough for this team to pull these games out of their asses, let alone the fact they have to do this 3 times now to take the series. And I just don't know if they have enough firepower to keep up. Facing a possible NL Cy Young twice in 5 games doesn't help either. And I just can't see the Grimace Haktua, OMG, Voodoo being enough to take out a team that's loaded on both sides of the ball, top to bottom. Do we really think we can just take the first 7 of 8 innings off and it's not eventually going to bite us in the ass? Even The Pete win couldn't cover up what my eyes watched for 7+ innings against the Braves, and then another 17 innings Wednesday and Thursday. The bad feelings are back, and the reports of the death of Negative Dan have been greatly exaggerated. So, Negative Dan, you aren't wrong with how bad things looked for periods of time. They were getting shut out by not just Tobias Myers for 5 innings, but the entire Brewer bullpen. It was very, very frustrating. And when you think back to what happened a night earlier when the offense went completely kaput after the first 2 innings, you're right about the math. They went 16 innings without scoring a run. And they do that a lot. Absolutely. And if they're going to win this series, they got to be better than that. I think that's fine. I think that's a fair point to have. But I think where maybe you should exert a tiny bit of confidence is that there's no guarantee the Mets are going to do that again. There's just no guarantee that they're going to go lifeless for 16 innings in a row. I agree if they do that, it's going to be much more difficult to hold the Philly lineup at bay than the Milwaukee lineup at bay. I agree with you about that. That's why the Mets can't have that happen again. They can't. They got to score runs. I think doing that against Zack is going to be very tough. One thing about Zack Wheeler, man, is he's just consistent. Like his worst outings are what? 6 innings, 2 runs? That's the worst of him. I think he's had maybe 2 bad outings all season long, one of which came against the Yankees back in what, July? When did they face them? He has been remarkably consistent for like the last 11 starts. So if that's what happens on Saturday, Zack does your typical, 6 2/3, 2-run performance. Yeah, the Mets are going to have to pitch really well to keep up with him. They're going to need Kodai Senga to have a clean inning if that's all he pitches. They're going to need David Peterson and Tyler McGill to pitch well out of the bullpen. But you are right. And I don't think it necessarily means you got to be negative about it, but you are right as we evaluate what it's going to take to beat a very talented Philly team in a best of 5. They got to score runs. We have to hope that Pete Alonso hitting that home run last night and giving us all goosebumps and making us tell stories about how he experienced it and if this is the greatest home run in the history of the Mets, that's got to lead to something for Pete. When I begged him on the air the other day, we need you, Pete. It wasn't just for one game. It was in general. He's one of their best hitters. He's a slugger. He's a reliable slugger. And now he's going to Citizens Bank Park. And the Mets are going to need a relatively hot Pete Alonso. That has to happen. If it doesn't happen, Mets will lose this series. They need it. And, do I think they're going to get it? Here's where my confidence lies. My confidence lies in the Mets' incredible ability to fight back, as we've seen all year, and we've certainly seen with these 2 insane victories over the past week. The other thing, and I believe this scares the Philly fan, I think this fears them. The Philadelphia Phillies the last 2 years had great success in the postseason. In 2022, they went to the World Series. In 2023, they lost brutally a 7-game National League Championship Series to the Arizona Diamondbacks. And what the Phillies did both years is in a lot of ways they were us. They were the upstart. They were the team that got hot at the right time. They were the team that had the magic and the mojo, especially in 2022. In 2022, the Philadelphia Phillies tried to not even make the playoffs, or at least that's the way they played down the stretch of the year. They basically struggled. Milwaukee wanted it less, and the Phillies made the playoffs. I don't want to say by default, but they didn't exactly come into the playoffs playing great baseball. And then they got here. They won 2 games in St. Louis against the Cardinals, and they beat a far superior Atlanta Brave team, mainly because they had momentum. Remember what the Braves have said the last 2 years? They've said the bye hurt them. Maybe there's some truth to that. But 2 years in a row, I think Philly fans know this if they're being honest, they beat teams that were better than them. And now they're that team. They're the team that won the division. They're the team that has more talent. They're the team on the bye. They're the team with all the pressure. It's on them. They're going to have to be the ones to answer. Hey, did that bye affect you? Hey, did that bye bother you? Hey, how'd you keep sharp for the last 5 days? They go into the division series in a very different spot. They went into the division series the last 2 years as the plucky underdog against the superior division rival. Not this year. And we'll see. We'll see if the Mets can beat the Phillies. Pete Hoffman, what is your official National League Division Series prediction? Go ahead.
Mets in 5. Very
Mets in
confident.
5, a full 5.
Full 5.
Yeah, I've gotten to that weird place. I kind of buy the pitsy dust. I buy the magic. I think the Mets are going to win this series in 4. I don't think it's going to even get to Philadelphia. I think they are going to win game 1 stunningly. I think they're going to keep the momentum going and stunningly beat Zack Wheeler. I think they'll disappointedly lose game 2, and then I think they'll win game 3 and 4. And I can't believe I'm saying that because I'm not a confident guy. I usually don't have those big, bold, happy predictions, but maybe I'm still feeling the magic of the Alonso home run. And maybe I'm feeling the magic of this Met team that even against the team that I think's better than them, I think the Phillies are better. And I know Met fans can argue that based on the record since June 1st. I totally get that. But I just think talent-wise, they're better. I think they have a better bullpen. I think they have a better rotation. I think they have a better lineup. That's what I think. And you know what? It doesn't matter because it's a best-of-5 series. It didn't matter if the Astros were better than the Tigers. It didn't matter if the Braves were better than the Phillies 2 years ago. It only matters is if you can take advantage of the moment. And right now, I think I'm on the high with everybody else, and I believe that they will.
So let me ask you a question, and I'm happy that you're on this positive train right now.
It's not positivity, because positivity is something you want to have happen, and I want it to have happen. I'm giving you my realistic opinion on what I think is going to happen, and that's different.
Okay, so I'm happy that the reality has changed for you. My question is, what took so long? Because this team, I'm not going to go back to June 1st. It's been like, but they have shown you so many times throughout the season that they can beat the best teams in the league. We've gone up and down the schedule. We've done 1,000 Ricos, or 355 to be factual. We've done 355 Ricos. The past 20 of them have been nothing but like miraculous.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think that there's been a lot of miraculous. There's been a lot of fun, but a lot of fun and a lot of great wins doesn't mean you're going to the National League Championship Series. This is a team that lost the game in Atlanta not that long ago that had us all panicking. This is a team that then followed that up after the rainouts by losing on a Friday night and a Saturday night to the Milwaukee Brewers, and it felt as if they were going to choke up a playoff spot. I think that when you win 2 games the way they won this week, I mean, this is one of the craziest weeks in the history of the Met franchise. We have so many Rico Brognas just based off this week. Like, this offseason is going to be so loaded with Ricos because there's so many things that we can go even further in depth on once we have the offseason time to think about it. I think when you win games like that, it makes you think the magic's on your side. You know, I think back to 2015, which is my favorite team. I don't know if you know that, but I love that 2015 team. And I think a lot of the reason why I love the 2015 team is the same reason why we're all falling in love with this team. It had this incredible story. The story of 2015 was they're off to a good start. Then they struggle. They have no offense. It's so putrid that trading for Kelly Johnson and Juan Uribe makes you think like they're heroes. And then they make a trade. One of their players is traded and he's crying. Then the trade falls through. Then they lose this horrible game in the rain. Then they make a surprising trade for a slugger. And then the slugger is our hero. And then before that, the guy who cried hits a game-winning home run. And the Mets take off. And then our old hero, who had been gone for a while with a back issue, comes back. And his first game back hits a home run in Philadelphia. And so that whole story was so incredible. It didn't feel real. And then you think of that first round against LA, man, everything about that first round was a classic. The way Jacob deGrom dominated game 1, the way they lost game 2, but we had the controversy of Chase Utley being a dirty, dirty prick. Then you've got the winning game 3, the loss in game 4. And then to me, until yesterday, my no doubt about favorite all-time Met game in my lifetime was game 5 of the 2015 NLDS. All-time favorite. I'm not old enough for 86. I'm not old enough for 88. I'm not old enough for 69. So for me, it's 90. In terms of success, it's 99 and above. And that 2015 game was the greatest game I'd ever witnessed until last night. And then you sweep the Cubs and you're in the world. Like, I loved that team. But I didn't believe in that team immediately, Hoff. It took a while. Like, things had to happen before you're like, holy crap, they just went to LA and beat Zack in a game 5. Like, why can't we beat the Chicago Cubs? So I do think it's normal as a fan to have experiences during a season that make you believe more and more and more. And if the Mets lose, am I going to regret having confidence to you on a Friday night, Saturday morning on the Rico? I'm not, because this team earned that kind of confidence from all of us. And hopefully we're right. And hopefully this run continues.
You know what? I agree with that. The 2015 ride, I didn't appreciate it. I really didn't. Like, the playoffs were great, and I think we all, once they got in there, were appreciative. And the Cespedes, August and September was great. But the entire season, I did not really buy into, and I was very hesitant. This season, I kind of forced myself to buy into it because I felt like I had to. I felt like this may be that opportunity. And so far, I've been rewarded.
Well, and that's why, at the beginning of this podcast tonight, I said, boy, the pressure's on Philly. There's no pressure on us. We go into this series, and I'm like, all right, they're the better team. Let's see what we can do. It's all a lie. It's not a purposeful lie. I'm not purposely telling you something that's not true. It's that I know that even though I have that feeling today, I will not have that feeling tomorrow. Because the feeling tomorrow is, you're here, do something about it. You never know if you're going to be back. And I have said that about every team I've rooted for. I've said that in every circumstance. You're here. We may not have expected it. Sure, I would have taken this at the start of the year. That's a stupid point. You're here now, win. Because you don't know if you're going to be back. Just because Steve Cohen has a big checkbook and just because half the Met fan base thinks they're going to steal Juan Soto from the Yankees doesn't mean you're going to do that. And by the way, even if you do that, it doesn't mean it's going to work. It doesn't mean you're going to win. So when you're here and you find yourself 3 wins away from the NLCS, 7 wins away from a World Series, 11 wins away from a World's Championship, go do it. We have seen lesser talented teams get to a World Series before, and why not us? Why can't we be playing the San Diego Padres in the NLCS? By the way, speaking of the San Diego Padres, Joe Musgrove, Tommy John surgery, out for the season. So any hope of getting revenge on Joe Musgrove, unfortunately for him, he's out for the year. And while we were doing the Rico last night, Terry Francona is coming back and managing the Reds?
Yeah.
That's some crazy crap, Hoff.
That was crazy. I was going to mention it to you at some point in time during the Rico, but I think I forgot when we were screaming and going crazy over Pete Alonso. Speaking of Pete Alonso, one last question for you. All right. So, like, Daniel Murphy in 2015 was the guy that kind of led the Mets throughout that entire playoffs. Last night's at bat from Pete Alonso, do you feel like he's going to be that version of Daniel Murphy? He's going to be the guy that's unlocked.
No, because I think that what he did was so special. Like, to get that kind of hot is insane. And Pete doesn't have to get that kind of hot. He just needs to contribute. Pete Alonso has not contributed a lot in terms of driving and runs over the last few weeks. He's had some good at-bats. He's drawn some walks. He's played good defense. It's not that he's been useless, but he hasn't contributed enough. And I think this team is built in a very different way, where Starling Marte is contributing. Jesse Winker's been contributing. Francisco Lindor, of course, contributing. Mark Viento's contributing. So I think Pete, and what we need from him, while it'd be great for him to carry us, I don't think that's even necessary. It's more be a contributor. And I am hopeful that one at-bat, we've said this a lot over the course of regular seasons where we're like, I hope that at-bat turns into a hot streak, or that at-bat will get a guy hot. We're thinking the same thing. That home run, that incredible, we'll never forget home run, hopefully gets Pete Alonso hot. As far as the Rico is concerned, we will be doing a Rico Brogna after every postseason game. So they play on Saturday, 4:00 first pitch. I don't know if the Rico will be immediately after the game, but surely that night. And we'll certainly give you a heads up by tweeting it out. And of course, that's why you should subscribe to the WFAN YouTube channel. Obviously, the podcast will be posted as soon as we can. Sunday will be fun now, because I'm going to Philadelphia. And so we will have a drive home from Philly edition of the Rico Brogna. It won't be the entire drive home, but we'll have a drive home edition of the Rico with special guests. My wife, my oldest son, my youngest son, we're gonna keep back, and my dad. So how about that little combination we got going on? I'll even ask some questions throughout the broadcast. I'll say, Dad, what'd you think? Jet, what'd you think? Honey, got anything to say? So we'll have a very fun Sunday evening, because it's a 4:00 game, so figure we're talking 7, 8 o'clock at night. A Sunday evening drive home edition of the Rico, as long as Hoff can do it, because he's a busy man too. He produces New York Giants football, and the Giant game is happening at the same time as the Met game. So hopefully we'll be able to make it work. But either way, after every postseason game, we will be providing you with Rico's reacting to everything. And for Rico Brogna himself, I know this is tough. It's tough for him. I know, Rico. I know what's going on here. You're a Met. You're honored there's a podcast named after you in the New York Mets community. But I also know that you're a Philly. I know that. And so this is a tough one for you, Rico. But just remember this. We have a podcast about you. Okay? We show more loyalty to number 26 than the city of Philadelphia. And I will be representing you in the city of Philadelphia, of course, with a Met jersey. Have a great weekend, everybody. Let's go, Mets. And thank you very much for listening, subscribing, and downloading another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.